Consular, I was asking a lot, how long did it take you from the time you gave the test to they actually called you? Because I heard there's some delays sometimes. It could be like a year or two before they call you or even more. How long did that
Yeah.
go for you?
So I would have taken the written exam in March, the oral exam in December, and I didn't join until June of the following year.
Well, relatively
So
quick for that process. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like
yeah.
high
It can,
school.
but it can stretch for years. It's definitely something I advise young people considering it. There's no harm in taking the test, but just keep it on the back burner. Don't quit your day job.
Great. So you took the foreign exam, you got they accepted you, and then how did the assignments go? What happened after that?
Yeah, so then you come in and you do an initial training, which is called A100. So that's kind of your orientation and introduction to the Foreign Service. You come in a class, and so think of like cadets, newly christened Foreign Service officers. And so there's a list of job postings around the world, predominantly consular related positions, especially for entry level officers, and a list of individuals. You choose preferences, but they may not match.
Yeah.
They say frequently in the Foreign Service that you serve at the will and the desire of the department. So where it makes sense to send you, they are ultimately going to send you. So my first post was to Quito, Ecuador, which fortunate for me was my number one choice. I wanted a Spanish-speaking country and wanted to kind of keep from a time zone perspective, roughly in the same part of the world.
Were you married at the time or married now or anything like that, kids?
Married at the time, yeah, yeah. To an attorney. So my wife at the time was in law school, so we were going through it.
So, I mean, did you leave and she stayed in law school or how did that work out?
Yeah, yeah. So she was in the so I finished the oral exam and found out I got into the Foreign Service when she was finishing her or in the midst of exams for her 1L first
Oh,
semester.
one L
So
year.
we were really, so those who have been through that process know what a stressful time that is. And then we determined she was in Chicago at Northwestern, and so we determined like, okay, so our lives are going in two different directions here, but we'll make it work, and ultimately did.
Consular officers, it gets really frustrating as immigration lawyers sometimes dealing with consular, but they have to undergo a lot of hardship in their life to make this happen because you're at the whim of the departments and you get sent to, you might get sent in the middle of a war zone for all you know, or the expectation to have you all over the place. So it is a sacrifice. It's a hard thing to do. So you went to Ecuador. What cone were you?
I was public diplomacy cone, so more kind of outreach, cultural exchanges, and that's where really the root of sports diplomacy started. Was kind of working in that space that would bring people together from foreign audiences together with American people. But my first tour was fully consular.
And what kind of consular issues did you see in Ecuador pop up a lot?
So I worked on the line. So I was I was an NIV officer, so adjudicated tens of thousands of NIV interviews in Ecuador. There were a lot of Colombian, Venezuelan refugees at the time, so it wasn't just Ecuadorians, but you definitely saw a high number of third country nationals as well come through. I also worked on American Citizen Services. So foreign service is essentially broken into five expertise areas: public diplomacy, which is kind of outreach and connecting people. There's consular, which your listeners will probably be most familiar with. There's economic, which would focus on the business issues and improving relations between our two countries and the host country. Politics, which is more fostering the growth of democracy, and then management, which is actually the logistics of managing an embassy and
Mhm.
all of the shipping around the world. But it really was, the thing that was shocking to me, John, was just how quickly I went from finishing my Spanish exam, getting my 3-3, what they say, you're proficient in Spanish. And then did consular training, which was 10 weeks, if I remember correctly, but that covered all of American citizen services. So everything from passports to jail visits to death notifications to families if you have an American citizen who dies in a country, all of NIV, all of IV, everything with green cards, all of the interaction between the State Department, USCIS, DHS, which was still at that point fairly new and still kind of working out some of the kinks, and some would argue even today.
Yeah.
Customs and Border Patrol, and kind of how all those entities fit together. So it's not enough time to really fully comprehend. And so much of the job is just getting there and learning as you go.
Yeah, 13 years into it, I have a show where I talk about it. I'm still trying to figure it out. So 10 weeks, it's never ending. So
Yeah.
again, like, were there any particular issues for Ecuador? You got third country nationals to come. Were there like gang member issues. I don't do Ecuadorian cases. I don't mean to
Sure.
discriminate, but you see that when it comes to like Honduras, Nicaragua. Like, did you have those? I don't think I don't know, but Ecuador doesn't really have those kind of issues, or did that kind of stuff pop up with tattoos or anything like that?
No, no, that wasn't really an issue in Ecuador. It's a predominantly indigenous population,
Mhm.
and so very entrepreneurial culturally. And so there's a sizable, and I mean, obviously for most countries around the world, there's a sizable population in the greater New York City area, but Ecuadorians in particular, some estimates have that because Secretary Clinton visited Ecuador and said, "I used to represent the largest city in Ecuador because there's more New Yorkers more Ecuadorians in New York than in any one city in Ecuador.
Interesting.
There's just such an outmigration." And so, from that perspective, refusals were somewhat high. It was a lot of tourist visas. And then a lot of immigrant visa cases, which were predominantly adjudicated in Guayaquil. There's 2 posts in Ecuador.
Oh, interesting.
And so a lot of the immigrant visa cases went down there, but you had a lot of dual nationals, and then you had parents who migrated to the States, some overstayed visas, had children, those were American citizens. And so there were just a lot of kind of thorny, immigration issues to kind of sort out with a population that was so mobile and so accustomed to moving back and forth to the States.
How long were you there?
I was there for a little over 2 years.
And then what was the next post after that?
I also, while I was in Ecuador, I did an extended, what we call TDY, so a temporary duty assignment to Suriname, and I was the consular chief in Suriname. And that was also really interesting. South American country, but the national language is Dutch. I didn't speak any Dutch, but they also speak English and then work through a translator when needed. It also oversees all of Suriname, the capital city, Paramaribo, and then French Guiana is the next country over. And so French citizens would come over for immigrant visa issues in Paramaribo. So it was a fascinating city and a fascinating environment to work. And they had a stack of immigrant visa cases because they'd had turnover and then didn't have anybody there. And so we really worked to start chopping through those and reduce their overall wait times for interviews for immigrant visa cases. And it's interesting now because the wait times then in 2011 were just it was months behind, which was unheard of. We had to reduce that. And now here we are in 2022, and it's like, oh, if I only had a couple months, that'd be great.
Cool. So that you learn a lot from the process of heading up a busy embassy like that, especially when you have third-party nationals come in, so much documentation that's different and stuff like that to learn. And then what happened after? What was the next step after that?
So then my next overseas tour was in Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. There I was a spokesperson for the embassy, but still with my consular background, worked closely with Consular. And then that was an opportunity to stretch my legs in French a bit and do a fair amount of radio and newspaper and television interviews in my choppy French. So, but did our best to represent the United States in a country that was coming in kind of a post-crisis mode, coming out of a civil war that had really drug on for the better part of a decade. So really a fascinating time to be there and to see kind of U.S. development aid and how that can be used effective, but also how that might be better directed. And so just being there during a very dynamic time. And then my last tour was coming back to the States and working in an office of sports diplomacy. So in the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs, there's an office that facilitates exchanges. So essentially having professional athletes and coaches go overseas and do sports programming with embassies to reach youth audiences. And it was through that I got to know folks at the NBA who wanted to bring somebody on with State Department experience, and I made that transition into pro sports.